Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome back. As you guys know, is just going to be the forever intro because that's all I can do. I don't know, I'm just glad that Courtney and I finally got around to recording today because, we had a lot to chat and catch up on because we typically work out together on Sunday mornings over FaceTime, so we've already chatted and caught up on things then. But today, pregnant Jacqueline was lazy and skipped it, so when we sat down to record, I was like, oh, I have to tell you about my new bras and this dress and my neighbor's new fence and all those super important things that you have to tell your best friend about, obviously.
And let's not forget either that we also FaceTimed for our workout yesterday morning, and we basically text like all day long, and we're still like, ooh, I have to tell you this. Ooh, I have to tell you that.
You have to share all the moments in your life, right?
It's been a long year. We all need just some human interaction in any way we can get it.
Yes, and please let us know how your interactions with your best friends are. Like, are you the same way, or do you, go a couple of days without talking and then, catch up kind of thing? Or, do you just, tell every single detail of your entire life? I'm interested.
Yeah,
I would like to know.
I know Kevin is not like that, and I don't know if it's a Kevin thing or, a man thing, but... he'll literally be talking to someone. I'm like, you didn't tell them about, anything? Nothing?
I mean, I think it's definitely a man thing because one of Andrew's friends he reached out to one time to, get together with him and his wife, and he's like, oh, we divorced a few months ago, and, it's not funny, but it's, someone that Andrew's a really, really good friend with, it's not like it's some, acquaintance, they just don't talk often, and I'm like, okay, but that's, a major life event you usually tell people. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a man versus woman thing, and definitely in our group chat, there's a lot of overshare.
Yes, for sure.
Everyone knows everything.
Yeah, so that's all we have going on lighthearted this week because, well, I guess there are a couple of other positive true crime updates to cover. But before we get into that, we do want to talk about the shooting in Boulder, Colorado that happened this week at the time that we are recording. So obviously we don't want to focus too much on the shooter, but a man named Ahmed Al-Aliwi Alissa did murder 10 people in Boulder, Colorado, in what appears to be just a random mass shooting. At this time, there haven't been a whole lot of details released. That may change in the coming weeks. By the time you hear this, I'm sure there's been more released about it, but we will share more if we have more information then. But we did want to remember the victims as we always do, so we are going to read their names really quickly. And I'm really sorry if any of these are mispronounced. I'm trying my best. We have Trelona Bartkowiak, Suzanne Fountain, Terry Liker, Kevin Mahoney, Lynn Murray, Ricky Olds, Nevin Stanisic, Denny Strong, Eric Talley, and Jody Waters. So we do want to remember those 10 individuals who tragically lost their lives in yet again another mass shooting here in the United States.
Yeah, and that's just the thing is there's been a lot of these mass shootings in the past, and I have seen people being like, I am wondering once things are opening back up if it's just going to be worse. And they were at the grocery store. They weren't, you just go to get your groceries, something you have to do usually every week. And so now in the U.S. it feels like you can't go to school, you can't go to the grocery store, you can't go to a concert, you can't go to a restaurant,
movie theater,
you can't go to a club, a movie theater. The list goes on and on. A church, or, well, especially not a Christian church, basically. And it just feels like the list goes on and on of when is it going to end and when is something going to change? Mm-hmm. And it's just really heartbreaking, and it's really sad that people keep losing their lives for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just so tragic, and obviously we're the only country in the world that has mass shootings to this level. Obviously, they do happen other places. We're not saying that they don't, but to the extreme level that they happen in the United States, like, that just doesn't happen elsewhere.
Yeah, and I want to say also, like, the Second Amendment was not talking about an AK-47.
Yeah.
And no one is taking away your handguns.
Nope.
You just really do not need a war weapon at your home. No one really needs it.
And just to hop on my soapbox really quickly, so, you know, if you guys want to skip ahead a few minutes to get to today's case, go right ahead. But no, gun control is not trying to take away your guns. That's not the point of it. It's to make sure that they are registered, that you have been trained, that there are safety measures in place. So no one's trying to get rid of all guns. I don't think that's been anyone's platform ever. So
yeah, like, if you want to have, like, a handgun in your home for your protection, it makes you feel safe. Like, I'm perfectly okay. Like, keep it. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I also
right
don't
ahead.
think you need, like, an AK-47, and that you're able to just get that AK-47, like, same day, no background check, like, nothing, just getting it. So that's our little soapbox for the day. Hopefully something will change, and hopefully these mass shootings will just chill out. But we'll see.
That would be nice.
There was some big true crime news in Tennessee as well. So about a year ago, there was a little girl named Evelyn Boswell who went missing. And basically her parents didn't report her missing for months, I think it was. Like, she'd been missing a really long time. The mother was arrested, and she thinks she's still in jail waiting trial. But they did pass Evelyn's Law in Tennessee. At least it is, went through all the proper means, and the governor just has to sign it. But basically that allows the state to press charges against family members who don't report children 12 years or younger missing within 24 hours.
Yes, which is definitely a good thing.
Yeah, which you would think is just common sense. But clearly in these cases, when they don't report them missing, when they're 12 years or younger, there's something fishy going on.
Yeah. And it's the same type of thing with Casey Anthony, that there was no proof. So as far as arresting her, they didn't really have anything to arrest her on until much later. And it's the same type of situation here. So that's why this law being implemented is a good thing, because now you have something that you can at least get them on to try to get more information versus just having to wait until you find a body, which is usually what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I think, that's the big thing too. I hope nobody uses this wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, especially for separated parents, and the dad might not know, or the mom might not know. I hope they don't abuse it. I hope it's just used for good, like it's intended. But I think that's a pretty great thing. But yeah, hopefully this does help, especially for parents who do, probably horrible things to their kids, because that's probably what it is in these cases.
Yeah.
When this would be used.
Because if you had nothing to do with it, why would you not report your child missing within 24 hours?
Yeah, like we always say, like, if my mom didn't get, like, a baby pic within 24 hours, she'd be, like, calling the cops, being like, I don't know where my baby is.
And especially, like you said, for someone under the age of 12, it's not like, oh, they're 16, like, they went to a sleepover, and, maybe, like, I expected them home later, but they were a little later than expected, so I feel like you're kind of cutting out those gray areas that could be problematic. So yeah, hopefully that will all be implemented as intended.
Yeah, definitely 12 and younger. If you don't see them for more than 24 hours, it's suspicious, or don't know where they are, When they get in their teen years, they get a little crazy. So, you gotta...
Yes. In other true crime updates, Virginia did officially abolish the death penalty as of this week. So the governor did officially sign it into law. We've talked about the death penalty a lot on this podcast, so we don't need to get into, viewpoints and different nuances and everything again, but just as far as true crime updates, that is a really big update that we no longer have the death penalty in Virginia. So
yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of states are pushing that way. The death penalty, it gets tricky. There's things on either side. But yeah, we've talked about it a bunch of times. Just go binge all our other episodes and you'll know how we feel.
I'm sure you'll find it somewhere in multiple places.
Yeah, so I think that is all we have with true crime news, true crime updates.
Yes.
So this week was supposed to be an espressode, but really it's just me talking for a full-length episode.
So you're welcome.
When we were researching our funny crimes cases, this one came up, and it's not funny, just prefacing that. I mean, it is, like, very wild, you know? Like, it takes a lot of twists and turns, but I wouldn't say it's funny per se because somebody does lose their life. But I was like, this story is crazy. I want to tell Jacqueline this story to just get her reaction because I'm, think it's so crazy. And then I ended up with like 10 pages of notes. So
just settle in to listen to Courtney talk for a long time. That's what I'm going to do. I got my coffee. I got my water. I'm sort of comfortable as you can be 8 months pregnant, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, so if you don't like my voice, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but it's going to be a lot of me. So this week, my references, I used a case file episode. It was number 36 called Amok. I used a Time article and a New Yorker article. So that case file episode and the New Yorker have a lot of information, a lot of good information. And they include more that I don't. So if you want more, go listen to that, read that. So on 9:30 a.m., November 13th, 2000, a man called an advertising company in Wrocław, Poland. I think I butchered that. I tried really hard. I'm so sorry, Poland. Please know I tried.
If you are Polish, please write in and tell us how to pronounce it correctly, and we will correct it on the next episode.
I listened to like recordings over and over of people saying it, and I just don't think my mouth can say it. Wrocław. Anyway, sorry guys. Hopefully I don't butcher too many names here. Anyway, so he wanted to speak to the owner of the advertising company, Dariusz Janiszewski, because he needed 3 advertising signs made up quickly. So Dariusz's mother actually answered the phone, and she was trying to ask him, follow-up questions like, what do you need? When do you need it? But the caller refused to speak to her. He only wanted to speak to Dariusz. And he just demanded to speak to Dariusz. But Dariusz was actually out of the office, so his mother gave him his cell phone number, and she didn't really recognize him, and she didn't take his name. So it was just some random guy just being like, I must speak to the man.
You women cannot work or do anything productive.
Yeah. So, and she said he did sound very professional. So Darius returned to the office later, said he had spoken to him and that he was going to go meet with him later. And at 4 p.m., he left the office to meet the caller, and he left his car in the parking lot, which his family said was unusual, that usually whenever he went to go meet someone, he would take his car with him, and usually, he'd be meeting them pretty far away from the office. So Darius never returned for his car, and he never made it home to his wife. He never contacted anyone to let him know where he was, which was also really unusual, so his wife did report him missing. Mm-hmm. So nothing really happened there, and then 4 weeks later in December, fishermen were fishing in this local river that was pretty hidden away. You kind of had to hike to get there, and wasn't a very popular spot. It was about 60 miles from Wrocław, and only really fishermen came here, and really not that often. But the fishermen did spot what they thought was a log. It's never a log.
I don't think it's a log.
But it was a head of hair.
Oh.
So they had discovered the body of a male, and the male had serious injuries and signs that he'd been beaten and tortured. His head was in a noose, and his hands and feet were tied into the noose. So like in a backward cradle position, kind of like, I hate to say like hog tied, but like backwards, yeah. Like kind of like that, like all connected. So it was basically designed so the noose would get tighter anytime like he moved his arms or legs.
Mm-hmm. So like as he's struggling, it's making it worse.
Yeah, which is like the ultimate torture. Like just thinking about that freaks me out. So the fisherman called the police, who quickly established it was a crime scene because...
Clearly. This was not a natural death.
No, he didn't do that himself. So police divers searched the river for any further evidence, but they didn't find anything. They also searched the banks and surrounding forest, but again, they still found nothing. And the body had been in the water for some time, so a lot of that forensic evidence was just washed away. And police searched through missing person records, and they did find that he was a match to 35-year-old Dariusz Janiszewski. I'm struggling with that name, guys. I'm so sorry. And he was identified by his mother, by his hair, and he had a birthmark on his chest, so they positively identified it is him. So in the autopsy, they discovered his stomach was completely empty. So that indicates that he had been starved for at least 3 days before his death. Mm-hmm. So, and at first, the pathologist believed the cause of death was strangulation, but there was also significant amounts of water in his lungs. So he believed it was possible Darius was still alive when he was thrown into the river. Mm-hmm. So obviously there's no doubt that this is murder. Like, this man is starved for 3 days. All this, coming together.
Pretty obvious cause of death at this point.
So the police were like, maybe how he was found could indicate gang involvement. I guess a deal gone wrong. And they also believed it was possible for more than one person to be involved because Darius was over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. So, I mean, he's a big guy.
Yeah.
Might take more than one person to do this. But criminal psychologists believe due to the circumstances, there'd probably be a lot of anger involved in whoever did this. And they said it seemed to be extremely personal, and they tried to make it their mission to punish Darius. So police are trying to establish a motive because they're like, well, if we can establish a motive, maybe we can figure out, is it gang involvement? Is it personal? Who did it? So they did interview his wife, family, friends, business associates, but he was just a young, successful businessman. He was very popular, friendly. Everyone called him just a gentle guy. He liked to play the guitar, and he would write music for a rock band that he was in. And they also examined his business records, and they found no shady or bad dealings. So the whole kind of gang involvement, clearly it probably wasn't something with his business gone wrong. Mm-hmm. And his marriage didn't seem to have any problems at the moment. And they had been married for 8 years. They had a few problems in the past, so I think they'd actually separated for a little bit. But they had reconciled, and they were actually planning to adopt a child in the near future. And she said that he was not really the kind of person to invoke fights or harm people. He was just kind of a gentle giant, I guess, since he was so tall.
Yeah. He
had no criminal record. He wasn't linked to any criminal associates. He had no debts. He had no enemies. And police were just like,
what do we do with this?
I don't know what to do. They're like, we can't find a motive. He's just a good person. And there's just no suspect. There's no evidence. There's no motive. There's no witnesses. So their investigation just kind of stalled because they were like, we just don't really have anything.
Yeah.
So they did go to the a popular TV show called 997. So 997 is the emergency number in Poland, and this show's kind of like the Polish version of America's Most Wanted. And it had already solved several other cases. So they're like, okay, this will give exposure to Darius's case. And the media was also referring to this murder as the perfect crime because literally they're like, we don't know. This person just got away with it.
Yeah.
So they're hoping this, primetime exposure is just going to really give them a lead, give them a break. But it did end up kind of being a bust. So many people for the next several months and years would look at the website. But police were surprised because they could see the countries that were viewing his page. And it was from Japan, South Korea, and the United States, which is pretty unusual for this Polish America's Most Wanted, basically. They're like, nothing really comes from this, but it was a bust. No information came out. So the only other useful piece of information the police had was the phone call that day he went missing. So they traced it to a payphone that was down the street from his office, which is weird. Like, why are you calling when you're that close?
Yeah.
And the payphone was also used to call his cell phone less than 1 minute after the call to his office. But police weren't even 100% sure this call was related to the disappearance. Like, I mean, he had a business. People were calling, wanting advertising things. So the police investigation was just completely abandoned in June 2001, and it just went to the cold case shelf. So then, like, media attention died off. It was just kind of forgotten. So in 2003, police decided to conduct a routine review of all unsolved murders. So the file of Darius made its way to their desks, and one investigator, Jake Rublevsky, spent hours looking through the file, trying to find just anything originally missed. And he did take notice to the fact that Darius was found naked, which also very interesting. And that he thought maybe his absence of clothes was an attempt from the murderer to humiliate him, because there really wasn't any sign of sexual assault either. Mm-hmm. Darius's wife also said that he always carried credit cards, but none of them had been used after the crime, so it seemed unlikely robbery was the motive as well. So he's looking at it and he's like, okay, I'm stumped too. He's like, I don't see anything. So Rublevsky was also stumped. He's like, okay, I see why this is on the cold case shelf. I can't find anything. He really didn't buy the gang involvement angle, since there's like no trace of any illegal interactions. And he really only believed like the gang involvement was possible if it was a case of mistaken identity, like if they thought it was a different person. He's like, that's the only way this can be it, and I doubt it.
Yeah.
So he really believed it was personal. So he really kept studying the file, and he was just determined to find something that would provide a lead. And his persistence did pay off, because Darius had his cell phone with him when he left the office, but it was never found. So he's like, if I can find this cell phone, maybe I can get a clue. So his chances are very, very slim of finding this phone. And it could easily just be at the bottom of the river, and just missed by the divers. Like, it could just be anywhere. So he did enlist the help of a telecommunications specialist, and the specialist explained that if the phone wasn't lost or destroyed and it was still being used, they could easily track it. But they would need the IMEI number, which I guess is a number on the phone, and they got lucky again because Darius's wife still had the receipt from when he purchased the phone, and it had that number on it.
Oh, wow. Just another reason to always keep your receipts.
Just another reason to be a hoarder.
But, I mean, she had it and could locate it, which is a big deal, because...
That is impressive.
Yeah. A lot of times it's like, oh, yeah, I saved that and don't know what I did with it.
Especially something that, like, you wouldn't think would be involved in, like, his disappearance. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, it's just where he bought his phone.
Yeah.
So Rublevsky got double lucky because the phone was still being used. He tracked down the owner of the phone, but he'd only recently purchased it. So they quickly eliminated him as a suspect. So then they tried to track down like who he bought it from and to try and trace it back to when Darius went missing. So it had been bought and sold several times since Darius went missing. And I'm like, this is like a 2-year-old phone. Like, that's so weird to me that so many people are using it.
What are you doing? Yeah, and especially at that time when it's not like a brand new phone came out every few months. Mm-hmm. Like, you would keep your phone for a long time because there weren't updates like there are now. There weren't plans where you could like trade it in for like an upgrade or whatever. So very unusual that would be so many people in that short period of time.
I guess they made phones better back then because I swear now after a year your batteries
Yep, I'm telling you, those like old school Nokias, like you could run those bad boys over, like you could leave it on for 14 days, like
yeah, we need to go back to that. So they kept tracking, how many times it had been bought and sold. So finally they found the man who had possession of it just days after Darius disappeared. So he had purchased a phone from an internet auction site called Allegro 3 days after Darius went missing. And the listing was found, and the seller's name was Crisp7, and it was spelled like CHRISB7. And this username belonged to a 37-year-old man named Krystian Bala. And Krystian is spelled Krystian.
Okay.
I promise this comes back. It's a whole thing when we get down the road. So, Krystian Bala was the oldest of 2 children, and he was born into like a middle-class family. His father was a construction worker and a taxi driver, and he was a really bright and smart child, and he was a good student, but he had trouble with other students because he was really egocentric and thought he was better than everyone else and smarter than everyone else, you know, like...
One of those.
One of those, and he was the first member of his family to go to college where he studied philosophy. So... Not, if you study philosophy, that's fine, but you also know the stereotype
Yes.
of men who study philosophy. So, he's fulfilling it. He like, made it that, probably. And he had just a huge ego. He had a lot of confidence, but he was actually really popular in college. And he was really popular with women as well. And then through college, he started to make up a lot of stories about himself. And so he liked to play games with people. And he made up so many stories that, like, even his friends were like, we don't know what was lie and what was the truth. Like, he would come up with just so many stories.
I know some people like that.
Same. I do. One of those where every time you see them post something, you're like, well, that's a lie.
Yep, definitely.
That's a lie. That didn't happen. So, Krystian did graduate in 1997 at the top of his class, and he enlisted in the PhD program, and so he'd always just dreamed of having an academic career, which I think if you're studying philosophy, that's probably where you're headed. There's not too many, other paths to take there.
It's pretty much what you got to look forward to.
Yeah. And however, things changed soon, because he did get married to a woman named Stesha, and she'd given birth to a son. So now he has a family he has to support, and you can't really do that on a PhD student salary. So he bought a cleaning business. And so he was, like I said, he was really smart, but he was a terrible businessman. Terrible. He spent all the money he earned. So they were saying, like, he was spending money before he even had it, and then it was just, like, ruined. And by 1999, he filed for bankruptcy. At this time, his marriage also crumbled. And Stesha said the worst part of their marriage was that Krystian couldn't stop cheating on her. And he just had affairs frequently, which...
That will end a marriage.
Yeah, I was like, that would be a terrible part of my marriage, too.
Right, that'll do it.
So they divorced in 1999. So 2 years later, Krystian was living abroad. So he lived in Asia and the United States. And he made a living writing for a travel magazine, teaching scuba diving, and teaching English. So... he's like, peace out, Poland, I'm gone. So in 2003, Krystian published his first novel called Amok. So nothing really stood out in Krystian's background check, only a few minor things like the bad business dealing. I think he had a few theft charges, but nothing horrible. So Wróblewski tried to keep an open mind and believed it was possible that Krystian did have a reasonable explanation for selling Dariusz's phone, Maybe he just found it. Maybe someone else gave it to him. It's not really your smoking gun. It's not going to get you a conviction based off this. And Wróblewski couldn't really go overseas to interview Krystian when there was nothing strong in his background. Mm-hmm. So he's like, you know what? I'll just go ahead and read this novel, Amok, and see, what it's all about. Well, Amok is a sadistic novel. So it contains very graphic sex and violence scenes. Some people said it's reminiscent of Crime and Punishment. So the story revolves around a man named Chris, spelled C-H-R-I-S, who is a bored Polish intellectual who's into philosophy. His wife catches him having sex with her best friend, so she leaves him.
This feels a little John Orr-ish over here.
It gets very John Orr-ish.
Oh, good. Okay.
He starts abusing alcohol and then going on a sexual rampage, just sleeping with many women. Throughout the book, Chris mocks traditional philosophers. He criticizes the Catholic Church. In one scene, Chris and a friend steal the statue of St. Anthony from a church. And then in chapter 9, Chris murders his girlfriend Mary by tying a noose around her neck and stabbing her.
Interesting.
Another article said that the book says that Mary had a noose and her hands tied behind her back. But I saw 2 places saying more likely it was stabbing her. The book isn't in English translation, and I don't think I want to read it either way.
Yeah, no, I'll pass on that.
So I literally can't read it to tell you which one it is. So then he conceals the murder so well that he's never caught. And Chris also hints in the book that he previously killed a man who'd done him wrong. So this book published in 2003, and it didn't really do too well because it was so graphic. Like, apparently it was just, like, real raunchy. Few bookstores sold it, and those who did placed it on high shelves because they're like, we cannot have children accidentally grabbing this book. Gosh. We will get sued.
Yeah.
And despite low sales, Krystian said he believes one day his book will really be appreciated. And in a quote about the book, he said, "I wrote the book not caring about any convention. A simple reader will only find a few violent scenes with a graphic description of people having sex. But if someone really looks, he will see these scenes are intended to awaken the reader and show how fucked up and impoverished and hypocritical the world really is."
Oh, okay.
I don't know where between, like, sex, alcohol, murder, he's putting, like, let's take down the world. I don't know where he's putting that in the book. That's
got a lot
his
of
quote.
themes going on, you know?
Remember that ego? Remember that thinking he's better than everyone else?
I feel like that's coming into play a bit here.
Yeah. So Wróblewski is like, this is a little weird because the name of the main character is Chris. His name is Krystian. Mm-hmm. And Chris was also the name used to sell Dariusz's phone, the username on Allegro. The book describes getting away with murder. So it was a woman in the book, but there was a noose around her neck. But what really stood out to Wróblewski was the part of the book where Chris sells the knife he used in the murder on an internet auction site. So a lot of similarities here. And the detail of Dariusz's phone being sold on an internet auction site was not public knowledge, because they really kept that close because they have nothing, so they're trying to keep any, link they have.
Yeah, definitely.
And Wróblewski could just see the parallels between the book and the real life, murder investigation. He's like, this is just too much to be a coincidence. Like, there's just no way that this is, just so happens to be a coincidence.
Yeah, there's no way this guy doesn't have some kind of involvement in this.
Yeah, so Wróblewski looks a little deeper, and he's like, I'm going to compare the main character and Krystian. So both loved philosophy, both left their wives, both had a company go bankrupt, both travel around the world, both abused alcohol, and the scene where Chris stole the statue matches Krystian's criminal record, where he had been arrested in real life for stealing a statue of St. Anthony from a church. So.
Well, that's pretty spot on.
So Wróblewski's like, I'm wondering if he got some, inspiration from his real life writing this book. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, Krystian's the prime suspect now. But there's still not enough evidence to get him extradited back to Poland. Because what are you supposed to say? He wrote a book, and I think he did it.
Yeah.
They'd laugh him out of the police station.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing like we talked about with John Orr. It's like, okay, this is looking pretty likely, but we have to have some other evidence to go off of because this alone isn't enough because you just claim this is fiction and that's that.
Yeah, and Wróblewski couldn't even find a connection between Krystian and Dariusz. He's like, I can't find any way they even know each other. Mm-hmm. And so one theory he came up with was that they had an affair and then murdered him. This came because in the book, one of Chris's close friends comes out to him as gay and said that part of him wanted to strangle him with a rope and chop a hole in a frozen river and dump him there.
Okay.
So Wróblewski's like, okay, maybe Dariusz was, experimenting with his sexuality, maybe something started, and because of this, internal struggle with his, sexual identity, he killed him or something. But, again, that's just kind of from the book. There's no real standing to that.
Yeah.
So he decided not to interview Krystian's friends and family because he was scared they would tip Krystian off and that he would just never return to Poland ever again. So Krystian still made sporadic trips back to Poland to visit his friends and family, and so Wróblewski's like, I'm just going to be patient and I'm just going to wait until he comes back. So he continued to study his novel. He handed out various chapters to fellow officers, trying to find any other, like, clues or hidden messages. Like, do you see anything suspicious that I didn't see? And Wroblewski really became obsessed with the last line of the book, which reads, "This one was the one killed by blind jealousy."
Okay.
So he's like, could this be the motive? Is some form of jealousy? He also became really fixated on the part where he mentioned killing a man in the past who had wronged him. So Wroblewski's like, is he referencing Darius? What's going on? But again, this is a very unique investigation method to be relying on a fiction novel.
Yeah.
So a lot of the, other officers in the department really didn't support it. And like, you need to be very, very careful with this. Like, you're kind of getting obsessed with this. It's not necessarily like a work of fiction doesn't equal murder, even if Wroblewski's like convinced a mock was Darius's murder, basically. Yeah. So as he looked hard into Krystian, he found something interesting on the internet auction site Allegro. So 1 month before Darius disappeared, Krystian had clicked on a book titled Accidental Suicide or Criminal Hanging. And it was a police manual. And there were different ways in it to tie a noose. So, I don't know who let that police manual out.
Yeah, that's, no.
Maybe keep that. But again, not really hard evidence, but added to everything else, he's like, okay, this isn't looking good for Krystian. So, Krystian did return to Poland in 2005, and Wroblewski had been working on this case for 2 years. So Krystian's passport flagged when he entered the country, and so he was arrested on September 5th after leaving a drugstore. So Krystian really gave nothing away at first, and he denied any involvement in the murder. He was very dismissive of questions, said he'd never heard or met Darius, don't know who it is. When they asked him about selling his cell phone, he said he couldn't remember where he got it. It was 5 years ago, which if you are selling a lot of stuff, like, that's not that crazy to think. So then they questioned him about a mock and he said he'd use different parts of his life to inspire it, but he said, show me an author who doesn't do that. Which is true. So then they asked if he had help killing Darius. And at this point, he looked offended and said he didn't have any help. He killed him on his own. You just said you didn't know him. So, as soon as he said this, he started urgently looking around the room and started making weird facial expressions. And he's like, I need something to drink. And he requested a doctor. He's like, I'm sick. I need a doctor. So,
always.
They suspended the interview and called an ambulance, but they examined him and found nothing wrong.
Shocker.
And said, you're fine to continue your interview. Go ahead.
Keep going. Keep digging your hole further.
Yeah. So the interview was restarted, and Krystian retracted his confession, and he refused to say anything further, and he refused to sign the interview documents, so the police couldn't use anything he said in that interview because it wasn't signed. So... isn't that always how it goes?
It is.
He was also given a polygraph test, and the results were declared inconclusive. In Poland, police can hold a suspect for 48 hours, then they either have to charge them or release them. So the case they had was circumstantial at best. They had no evidence, no motive. They couldn't link him, so they were like, we'll just charge you on selling stolen property and for paying a bribe, which they'd uncovered in his background check, like something completely unrelated. So the charges, though, meant he had to surrender his passport and remain in Poland. So they're like, okay, until we get something else, good enough. So Wroblewski had worked hard on this case for 2 years, but he just couldn't connect the dots. He just can't find any real evidence. And he just kind of felt like this investigation was slipping away. But he was flipping through Krystian's passport, and he noticed stamps for South Korea, Japan, and the United States. So it clicked in his mind almost immediately. The hits on those 997 website for Darius were in South Korea, Japan, and the United States.
Interesting.
So, kind of a weird connection. Like, you've never heard of Darius, but you're in all these places, and when you're there, you're looking at this website.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like, we got a little something here. They're like, we got a little...
Something to go off of.
They have so many, like, pieces to the puzzle, but it's like they can't put it together yet.
Yeah, like, they're like, we're almost there, but something's just not lining up quite right.
Yeah, and so all those dates in his passport were a perfect match. So, again, strengthening the belief, this is the guy, no evidence. So Krystian is a free man waiting on his court dates for those unrelated charges. And he was accusing police of harassing him and wanting to punish him for his art, which, if you didn't really know what the police knew, I could see that. Like, oh, I released this book and now they're, like, harassing me when they have nothing? Like, yeah, kind of weird. He also made a complaint that he was kidnapped and tortured by police when he was first arrested. And he got some support from his friends and some members of the public, saying the police were harassing him. And one of his previous girlfriends set up a defense fund for him. And an internet campaign was launched about the police persecution of Krystian and how unfairly he was being treated for writing a book that went against the Catholic Church and Polish tradition. And so they're like, okay, Krystian's the victim here. Like, they're just coming after him because he said things people don't like, basically. And letters even poured in from around the world from, like, human rights organizations in defense of him, saying he had a right to the freedom of expression as listed in Article 19 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So even, like, human rights specialists are like, yeah, you can't keep harassing him because of a book.
Mm-hmm. Like, just because of a book. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're going to change their tune here in a little bit. Spoiler.
Wait a minute. You mean he did have something to do with it?
You mean I went into this whole deep background of Krystian and he had nothing to do with it?
What if he did spend, like, 30 minutes talking about this guy, and then you're like, and then he had nothing to do with the case, and then we moved on over to the here.
I feel like that's so many, like, true crime research books that we've read for our cases.
That is true.
Where you're taking notes on all this, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, this is good. And then you're like, oh, and they were found out to have nothing to do with it, and you're like, delete.
Like, delete 3 pages. Okay, moving on.
All right, here we go. There's 2 hours of my life I'll never get back. So, the public were demanding Wróblewski and other officers on the case be held accountable to justice. So, a psychiatric evaluation was eventually ordered on Krystian, and he was found to have narcissistic traits and felt he was a superior human being, smarter, stronger, and much more intelligent than anyone else. So, he's an asshole.
I know some of those people too.
Hopefully they haven't murdered anyone yet.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised with one of them.
Which one? True. Anyway. Which one? So, Wróblewski was, like, desperately trying to find any evidence he needed to officially charge Krystian with the murder. So, he re-examined the calls made from the payphone. So this time he had the help from the telecommunications specialist, and they discovered the calls had been made with a phone card that had a unique identifying number. And they weren't able to trace who'd bought the card, but they were able to find out other calls were made with it. So they discovered the phone card had been used to make 32 calls over a 3-month period. So along with the calls to Darius's office and cell phone, calls were made to Krystian's parents, his girlfriend at the time, other friends of Krystian, and his business associates.
Okay.
So you don't know Darius, but you called his office and his cell phone.
Yep.
So Wróblewski is like, you know what? I believe 100% without a doubt he killed Darius. She's like, I believe it. I just have to find something to, like, get him with. Like, I just have to prove it more, I guess.
Yeah.
So, Wróblewski looked further into his breakup from his ex-wife, Stesha. And so he tried to interview her numerous times before, and she always refused. Like, she refused to speak to him. So, this time, Wróblewski tracked down one of her friends who was able to fill in a few of the blanks. So, Stesha's friend said Krystian was extremely possessive and controlling of Stesha. that he was physically violent towards her. He would constantly check her phone, demand to know who she's talking to, and then he would beat her up and accuse her of cheating on him. But do you remember all those affairs he had?
Right.
All right, Krystian. Cool. He just expected Stesha to do as she was told, but he just got to do whatever he wanted. So he just wanted to control her, but he could just, obviously go have sex with anyone he wanted.
Yeah.
And after their divorce, Krystian still remained possessive of her, and he would stalk her and do his best to control her. And in the summer of 1999, after their divorce, Stesha went out with her friend that was now speaking to Wróblewski, and they went to the Crazy Horse nightclub, where Stesha started chatting to Darius.
Okay.
In the club. So Stesha's friend knew who Darius was from around town, so she's like, I know 100%, like, that's who she was speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
So Wróblewski was like, okay, I got this. I have made my connection.
Finally.
I got this. Like, he's feeling good about himself. But he needed to hear it from Stesha. Like, he had to have Stesha saying it and not this, like, he said, she said kind of. So since he had this information, he's finally able to get an interview with her. And what finally convinced her was when Wróblewski showed her the connections with Amok. And he was like, look at this book. Like, I think he killed someone. Like, I need you to help me. So Stesha was, like, really disturbed because she was like, connections in the book are, like, exactly like real life. Like, even more so than you guys even know. Like, all of this is, like, things that happened. So Stesha confirmed that she had met Darius in the Crazy Horse nightclub, and they spent the night just talking, after which Darius gave her his cell phone number. So they did go on a date and checked into a motel, but Stesha found out that Darius was married. And she's like, I left because I've been cheated on countless times. Like, I'm not going to be that woman to someone else. My husband betrayed me. I can't do that to another woman. So I guess the whole Darius and his wife having a good marriage wasn't exactly correct.
Not very accurate.
Yeah. But I don't know if his wife knew any of this. So a few weeks after this, Krystian showed up to her apartment in a drunken state, and he kicked down her door and beat her, saying he knew everything about her and Darius. And he even screamed out to the hotel and number room where they were at. So he knew exactly, like, what hotel they had gone to. And as he was beating Stesha, he was saying he had hired a private detective and he knew everything. And when Stesha later heard Darius went missing, she asked Krystian if he had anything to do with it, and he said no. So here's another proof that Krystian knew Darius. And again, that Krystian was lying.
Yeah, and that it was, like, in her mind from the beginning as well. Like, this isn't something that years later she was like, okay, well, maybe that, like, she thought this in the beginning. Yeah.
She was like, okay, did you have something to do with that?
Yeah.
So Stesha didn't pursue it any further or go to the police because she just really didn't believe Krystian was capable of murder. And upon hearing this, Wróblewski immediately thought back to that last line in a mock where he said, this was the one killed by blind jealousy. And so he's like, I think this line makes sense now. Like, I've connected it. So Krystian was finally charged with the murder of Dariusz Janiszewski, and the first day of the trial was February 22nd, 2007, and in Poland, the jury's made up by the presiding judge, one other judge, and 3 citizens.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Interesting.
I could have done a deep dive, but we're already at, like, almost an hour here, guys.
If Patreon people, if you guys want something like that for a Patreon episode, let us know.
Yeah, definitely. We could try to get, like, different countries and like how their whole process works. If you'd like that, that'd be interesting. Let us know.
Yep.
So Krystian complained that his novel was being misinterpreted and that the police had taken parts of his life and presented them in a fictional story to, like, fit the theory of their murder. And he again said he never met Darius. She didn't know who he was. But the police did have the information from Stesha, but they didn't really have any other, evidence. And so they were like, it is kind of Stesha's word against Krystian's. And he claimed she was just being a vindictive ex-wife and making up stories to get him in trouble. So, but police had more evidence against him now. And so when they had charged Krystian with the murder, they had searched his parents' home. So Krystian had left some of his items there before heading overseas. And in these belongings, they found a notebook with details about Darius and his company written down.
Okay.
It's kind of weird that you've never heard of someone, but you have notebooks full of information.
With information. Yeah, that's interesting how that works.
They also found a pen and note card with Darius's name and company on it. So Krystian has always maintained he has no idea who he is, never heard of him, never met him, but clearly now we have evidence that you're lying again. Prior to the trial, the judge made a ruling that a mock could not be used in the trial as evidence. Mm-hmm. So they can't reference it at all. The judge didn't view the description of a fictional murder as evidence, but the police did have a lot more evidence now they could use. So they're like, okay, I think we can get by with this one.
We got a little more to go off of now.
Yeah. So a witness came forward and said that Krystian had questioned her extensively about Darius prior to his disappearance. So Krystian wanted to know everything about him, where he worked, who his friends and family were, how he could be contacted, all of that. So we have a lot of people who are now saying Krystian was looking for Darius. So another friend came forward and testified that at a New Year's Eve party in 2000, Krystian was at the same club as Stesha, and Krystian thought a male bartender was making advances toward her, and he had started screaming at him and saying he would take care of it, and he'd already dealt with such a guy. And it took 5 people to restrain him that night.
Wow.
And this is after they're divorced. So again, how possessive he is, after they're divorced.
Exactly.
So after all the evidence that was presented, the jury retired to reach their verdict, and they did find Krystian guilty, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And he immediately appealed his conviction. So the appeal cited logical and factual inconsistencies in the trial, one of which was being the cause of death, because apparently medical examiners couldn't agree what the cause of death was. One testified it was strangulation, another testified he drowned. So I guess they couldn't agree on that, and so he's like, haha, you can't get me, which I don't really think that matters.
Yeah, I'm either way, it's clear that it was murder, so it's not
Yeah. So he also used a comment made by the judge in trial as grounds for his appeal. So the judge had said he wasn't sure if Krystian had acted alone or with an accomplice. So I guess he could use that for his appeal. To the surprise of many, the appeals court annulled his conviction.
Did not see that coming.
Yeah, they ordered a new trial, but he did have to remain in prison until the outcome of the new trial was reached. And the appeals court said there was a connection between Krystian and the murder, but there were gaps in the logical chain of evidence. I don't really know how, but okay.
Yeah.
So Krystian's retrial was heard in December 2008, and he was convicted of murder again, and the sentence of 25 years was upheld. So Krystian maintains his innocence. He claims he's being set up. According to him, all the evidence against him was planted, and somebody was out to destroy him.
I'm sorry, did someone write that book and put your name on it?
Right. He said...
I get that's not, legal evidence, but come on.
Yeah, right. And he said that it was just bullshit, that he was sentenced to prison for a work of fiction. So some people suspect Amok was a confession, but others don't really see it that way. They think he wrote it to obtain literary immortality, to tell what he thought was the perfect story. So I guess people are like, you're so stupid, there's no connection, even though everything is the same.
Right, okay.
So he's been quoted as saying, there has never been a book quite like this written. So he thinks very highly of his book.
Clearly.
And many believe that Krystian's cockiness and belief that he was just better than everyone else led him to believe that he'd never be caught. So that's why he wrote about the murder and left behind so much evidence, because he thinks he's so much smarter than everyone else that he'll never get caught. So Krystian had started writing a second novel at the time of his arrest, and police had seized his computer with the beginning of this novel on it, and they'd also found that Krystian was obtaining notes on Stesha's new boyfriend. So it looks like, okay, what's he doing here? And he'd even posted on an internet forum looking for more information on him. So they really believe her new boyfriend was going to be his second victim and who he was going to write his second novel about.
Mm-hmm.
So Krystian has vowed to finish his second novel called Delirik. Don't know if I'm saying that right. I don't care because Krystian doesn't deserve it. Anyway. And he promises this will be even more shocking. So.
Okay.
In Amok, Chris is never caught for murder, but Krystian didn't really get the same fate. He was caught. Amok did end up being a bestseller in Poland. And I cannot find if Poland has Son of Sam laws like some of the U.S. does, so I don't know if he's profiting off of this or not. I tried to look it up, and I can't find anything. So that is the story of the murder of Dariusz Janiszewski. And shout out to Jack Wroblewski for following his gut and not stopping until Darius got justice. So
definitely. Wow. That was quite the crazy case. And yeah, could have so easily just stayed a cold case forever if it wasn't for that one guy.
Yeah, if he wasn't like, let me look into this and just like followed his gut and be like, let me keep following up. And it probably is likely that Krystian would have murdered again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
wow.
It was a crazy story. And every time I kept reading something, I was like, what is happening? It just keeps getting crazier.
Okay, so how did this come up on the list of funny crimes? Like, what did...
I don't know. It literally said, Polish author, writes about his murder and gets caught. And I was like, oh, that can be kind of funny. Then I'm looking into it, and I'm like,
this
isn't funny.
This is horrific.
Yeah. I'm like, this was so serious. But, yeah, just so many twists and turns, with the novel, and then, the website hits, in South Asia, Japan, and the United States, and they match his passport, what are the odds? It was crazy.
So many, little pieces of evidence that led to his capture. Yeah. Wow.
I was saying, that's why, I 100% believe Krystian did it, because there is way too much little evidence for this not to be, connected.
And, and we know, too, that sometimes people lie for reasons other than being guilty, but you did a lot of lying with all of this evidence. It's a pretty strong case here against you, bud.
It is. Especially, they have some pretty good, physical evidence, but, the circumstantial evidence can paint you the prettiest picture in the whole world.
So, sometimes I know we can get so caught up on only wanting physical evidence that in some cases it just isn't there, especially in this case where he was in the water for so long, but there are times that there is so much circumstantial evidence that you have to believe it.
Yeah. It makes me think in one of the documentaries I watched, Nancy Grace, I know she's can be kind of touchy, subject, but I thought she described it very well with physical versus circumstantial, where okay, you're outside and it's raining and you feel the rain, it's raining, but if you're inside with a building with no windows and you walk outside and it's wet everywhere, you didn't have to see the rain to know it rained.
Yeah.
It rained.
And there can be problems with circumstantial evidence. We're not saying that. But definitely. But there are times that there is enough that you're okay, we have to go with this.
Especially in this case where it's literally everything you did matches up with what nobody but the police knows and the murderer, obviously.
Exactly. So. Wow, that is a crazy case. And I know we do have some Polish listeners, so if you guys are listening and you know more details about this, or you just have your own personal anecdote of hearing about it, whatever, please write in, because we would love to hear about it or share any other information that you may have, in a future episode.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I butchered any of those names. I really tried, but my mouth was just couldn't do it. I have trouble with the easiest names, as you guys have probably heard. I'm so sorry. I'm so bad at it.
We've had to edit out many of us not being able to pronounce just normal English words that are in our everyday vocabulary.
There was one case where her name was pronounced it was spelled like Renee, but it was pronounced
Rennie.
Rennie or something. Rennie.
Yeah.
I don't know why. My brain was putting up this block, nope, you can't say it, you can't say it.
Courtney
I
could
think
not
anyone,
get that.
if you've I feel like anyone, if you have like a podcast or you've done a presentation, like you understand those things where you're like, logically, like I know what I'm supposed to be saying or I know what this word is, but like something in the communication between brain and mouth are just not happening.
It's just there's a disconnect there that we're not meshing.
Yeah.
Oh, so Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
Okay, my perk of the week is it is officially 1 year until I get married. So the countdown is on. And I guess that really made me be like, I gotta start doing things.
Yep.
I gotta start doing things. So I'm trying to get like save the dates ready and like my registry. And so I've been looking because my favorite part of wedding planning is thinking about my honeymoon.
Of course.
Obviously. So we knew we were going to go to Hawaii, and I've been like looking at all these different like hotels and resorts, and there's been a few that I'm like, these are so nice, but we can never justify spending this much money. And then one of them had a deal, and I literally got the room for half the cost, less than half, I think. So they had free cancellation, and I booked it. I was like, no questions, I'm booking it. So I'm really excited now. I cannot wait to be in Hawaii for 2 weeks and just relax. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. That's my perk of the week because that's all I'm going to be thinking about until next year.
I mean, that is such a good perk of the week, and especially after the last year, it's such a good thing to like have to look forward to like know like, okay, this has been shit. We still got a few more months of shit left, but eventually this is what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, like, COVID kind of helped me because it was like their deal was like, you guys can come back to Hawaii now, because I'm sure those hotels and resorts have really suffered.
Absolutely.
Because every time I was looking it up before, they were like, if you come to Hawaii, like, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks before you can even like leave whatever room you're in. Which they've lessened now. You know, you might just have to have a negative test, or if you're vaccinated, like whatever. Hopefully by next year I won't have to worry about any of that.
Yes.
But so they're kind of being able to welcome people back, which also a lot of hotels are going quickly because of that. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to book it. I can always cancel it if something happens.
Exactly. Book it now. Such a good perk of the week.
Yes. I'm very excited. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is air conditioning. So as you guys remember from our episodes last spring and summer and into fall, I did not have air conditioning in my last house, and especially in the room that we would record in, it would just get so hot in there. I would be like drenched in sweat by the time we finished. Like the house. I mean, like I like took out our meat thermometer and it was like 80 degrees in our house. And if you live somewhere that you don't have air conditioning and you're laughing at me because that's normal, I'm sorry. I've been spoiled with air conditioning my whole life, so it was a big adjustment. But
it is very weird, like, especially growing up in the South, because it gets so hot that, like, you have to have air conditioning in every house. So, like, going to places where they're like, no, it doesn't get warm enough, or the weather's perfect, and I'm like, no, I need it to be cold. I'm sweating.
Right. Yes. So now that we're in a house that has air conditioning, and now that it's getting warm enough that we actually need the air conditioning, it is very nice. And as we've been sitting here recording, it's clicked on a few times and I felt everything just cool down, and I'm like, whew. Yeah, yes, this is the life, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So that's my perk of the week.
Yeah, Kevin told me, like, one time we were looking for stuff, he was like, I can never live somewhere that doesn't have, like, some type of, like, central AC. I was like, okay. And you're from the north, so that's pretty crazy if you're saying it.
Yeah.
So, because I think he lived in a room that had like a window air unit, and he was like, it was horrible. Yeah. I hated it so much. I never want to do that again if I don't have to.
Central AC is the best.
Yes, it is. Thank God for AC.
Yes. So if you guys want to tell us how you live somewhere that does not have AC and how we're just a bunch of big babies, you can do so. We're on Instagram at Caffeinated Crimes Pod. We are on Facebook at Caffeinated Crimes Podcast. We are on Twitter at Caff Crimes Pod. That's CAFF Crimes Pod. If you feel so inclined, you can also go to patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes, where we have a good amount of bonus episodes now. We're working on making sure to get at least one a month out. We also do other Q&As and Google Hangouts, have some goodies available, all kinds of fun stuff. If you have a few extra dollars a month to spare, consider checking us out over there.
Yeah, and we're constantly trying to find new things that we can do, especially things that maybe don't put more on our plate, because sometimes bonus episodes are hard to come by, or recordings, stuff like that. So anything you guys can think of that you're like, I would love this, and, you know, we can easily do, let us know, and we'll do it.
Definitely.
We're also still doing our Apple reviews giveaway. So once we get to 50, we'll choose one of the names and you'll get a pin, a sticker, and a $10 gift card to the coffee shop of your choice. So please go do that and just leave some identifying information, and hopefully we can give away some goodies to somebody.
Yes.
But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.